This is episode number 121 of the Guns Magazine podcast. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent Wheat. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. First, before we get started, let's have a quick chat about our sponsor, Luth Ar. Luth Ar is home of the MBA buttstocks, which are affordable, lightweight, fully adjustable buttstocks for your AR-15 fixed and collapsible rifle. But that's not all. Luth Ar is your one-stop shop for build kits, replacement parts, and custom accessories, including the chubby grip, palm hand guards, oversized switch safety, and paddle bolt catch. Luth Ar is proudly made in the USA, and with 4 decades of experience, will continue their mission of innovate to dominate with high-quality products for your AR. Find out more at luthar.com. Today is the conclusion of a 2-part episode focusing on dealing with the aftermath of a shooting. I'm talking with an old friend of mine and former co-worker, Captain Tyson Warmoth. He's been involved in 2 police action shootings, and in today's episode, he describes his experience shooting the person who had just killed one of his fellow officers. Afterward, Tyson finishes up with a discussion on his thoughts on post-traumatic stress and the need to develop your own warrior ethos. At times, this is a very difficult episode to listen to, but Tyson's final words are uplifting and encouraging for anyone who might find themselves someday at the tip of the spear. Now here's part 2 of What It's Like to Shoot Someone with Captain Tyson Warmoth. Well, welcome back, Tyson.
Thank you, Brent. Thanks for having me.
This is part 2 of a 2-parter, and if folks haven't listened to our previous episode, you are a police officer with the department that I retired from. We both started in the 80s as baby cops, and we've had a lot of adventures together. We came up on the SWAT team together, and the reason this is, I think, some compelling stuff is I've known you so long, we can talk about pretty much anything, and we're going to talk about your 2 police action shootings. In the first one, you talked about, and this was, 94 when you had that?
2004, I believe. 2004, yes, December of 2004.
Yeah, 2004. It was still kind of the dark ages a little bit, and that was a pretty interesting interview. We talked about all the things that happened. And now what we're going to do in part 2 is fast forward. And this is an incident that was just, 4 years ago?
2018, March of 2018.
Yeah,
yes.
So we're coming up on the anniversary of it.
4 years.
It was by far you hate to say any shooting's not tragic, but the first one was a pretty straightforward incident, basically a suicide by cop.
Correct.
The second one was a lot more awful. A police officer died, and you were there, and you put the suspect down. Let's go back to that day. This actually started out as a warrant service, wasn't it?
A simple warrant service.
Yeah, on day shift.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, the first time you were a patrolman.
Correct.
Now we fast forward to this latest, you're the chief.
I was the chief of police at the time, yes.
Yeah. So, kudos, you lead from the front. And when you heard all this, it was one of these situations that it was a feces sandwich or a soup sandwich, you might say. It started out as a warrant service, pursuit all over the place. You were the chief. You heard all this going down on the radio. Start from there.
I was in my office, like most chiefs are, riding a desk. And, I had the radio on.
In the rear with the gear.
In the rear with the gear where it's safe. Now, I was 52 years old. I don't want to run out and run and gun with the younger guys. You know, I want to stay back up on the porch.
Well, you say that, but go ahead.
And so I'm listening. I've got my radio on. I, always had a radio on. And, of course, I can see what they're doing on the computer. And they were going to go down and serve a warrant at one of our local trailer courts. And evidently when they got down there to serve the warrant, they noticed a vehicle parked outside with, I believe, 2 wanted subjects in the car, not even affiliated with the warrant they had.
Like next door.
As they approached the car took off, and the vehicle pursuit began. And it wound through all over the city. They weren't really trying to escape the city.
Yeah.
No, they were whipping down alleys and
they were trying to find a place to bail out is basically what they were doing.
Yes. And I'm in my office hearing this, and upon hearing this, I jumped up and I yelled at the assistant chief. I said, "You hear what's going on?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "Well, let's go join them." Now, what I'm going to say is probably not the most politically correct but again, I started my career in the 80s and really formulated in the 90s because back then I knew, hey, it's a pursuit. That's going to end with an ass beating. So, again, not politically correct, but, for all your law enforcement listeners out there, they're all shaking their head. Yeah. Back in the day, that's what would happen before, everything the way we are now.
And let me add an editorial. It didn't matter if you were black or white, old or young. If you did stupid stuff, you had to pay a price. And we weren't brutal. We didn't kill people. But
no clue what the race were these people were running. It didn't matter to me. It's we're hound dogs. That's a rabbit.
Yeah.
Must chase rabbit, you know. And I thought, even as a 52-year-old chief, I thought, I want a part of that. So I ran out. And I remember jumping in the passenger side and letting the assistant chief drive. Uh-huh. And we're in big Tahoes, not the most
nimble.
It is not nimble, but this, and of course, in my mind as chief of police, I'm also thinking, okay, we've got to set up a perimeter.
Yeah.
I'm thinking tactically that I've got to get perimeter set up, but it was almost nearly impossible because these people
just kept running.
You try to set up a perimeter, they'd drive through a yard, and it just kept going and going and going, and
it was very Blues Brothers-esque.
Very. We had not only members from the police department, our local sheriff's department, a small-town marshal and his deputy came over and joined in. We had various state police, all various departments, all chasing this one vehicle.
I think even the conservation officer was involved.
We all wanted a piece of it.
Yeah.
And so, we're all over the city trying to form some sort of perimeter to kind of hem these, to contain them. And then they pulled into an apartment complex, and we're all very familiar with the roads, and the assistant chief turned down into a cul-de-sac just on the east side of that apartment complex, because I knew there was only one way into that apartment complex, again, unless you drove through some yards between buildings, and I knew that our officers would block that exit.
Right.
So I thought, we have them trapped in this apartment complex. And we're on this little cul-de-sac, and there's we're just to the east of the apartment complex, not more than, 50 to 75 yards. And there's a small, maybe, 15-yard stretch of woods, growth of trees separating the cul-de-sac and the back of the apartment complex. And as we're pulling into the complex, we hear over the radio, shots fired, shots fired, shots fired, officer down. To this day, I have no idea who was yelling that on the radio. And at that point, I remember jumping out of the vehicle and running through the woods. And as I started emerging from the woods, I saw an officer in uniform, a brown uniform, face down in the back. And I started sprinting across the yard to that officer, and then it hit me. Someone yelled something over the radio. Again, I don't know.
Yeah.
Hearing something say, the shooter's between the buildings. And I'm out in the open. And it occurred to me, that's not a good place to be. So I ran back up to the building, and I thought, I'll run alongside the back of the apartment complex and use that as cover and get to that corner, pie the corner, and make sure that way's clear before I go to assist the officer.
Because at this point, I'll set the stage. You got an officer down. You've got cops running
everywhere,
like ants, and you got a shooter running around that's just killed a cop, and we don't know where he is.
Well, and we have I don't know how many shooters we have.
Right.
We had 3 people in the vehicle. And, I don't know how many shooters we have of it out in there. I don't see any other cops other than myself and the downed officer. So it's amazing, after I'd been a police officer, and by then, 29 years, and with 17 years on SWAT, and I knew Nope, get up next to that building. Don't run out in the open. Pie that corner. Peek, keep moving out. It's clear. I turned around. I saw the officer still face down. I ran to him. I yelled his name. He was face down, and I started lifting him, and then I saw where the blood was coming from, basically a left eye wound.
Yeah.
He had been shot in the eye. And I didn't roll him over. I remember feeling for his pulse, and I could not find his pulse. And, they say everything slows down, goes in slow motion. It's true.
Yeah.
It really is. And then I heard yelling coming from the north, and I looked up. I was knelt down by the officer. I looked up. I could see between the buildings into the parking lot. And then I see an individual wearing a long trench coat with a black pistol in his hand. And I remember my thinking was, there's that son of a bitch.
Mm-hmm.
So I took off running at him. And as I was coming between the buildings, and between the buildings, we're only talking 15 yards at the most between buildings. As I emerged from between the buildings, I was running by this pickup truck had a camper shell. And as I passed the camper shell at the very end of the truck into the parking lot, I turned, and there he was. And he was 15 yards maybe from me. And he spun around, bringing the gun to bear on me. I jumped back behind the truck for cover, but I could still see him through the glass of the camper shell. And I thought, he's going to try to get in front of that truck before me. He's going to come around the truck and try to shoot me. So we're going to have this gun battle across the truck hood. That was my thoughts. And so I started backpedaling really quick while trying to watch him. Now, just to the north of me, across the parking lot, there were 3 officers emerging, and they were screaming, "Drop the gun, drop the gun." Through the windows of the camper shell, I saw him divert his attention to those 3 officers. And I thought, there's my chance. So I jumped back from behind the truck out into the open. I remember bringing my gun up. Everything is going in slow motion. He sees me, and then he starts spinning around, and I see the gun coming to me. It's in slow motion. I remember bringing my pistol up. I had a good front sight picture, and I remember pressing the trigger, and I remember seeing like an invisible finger poked him in his jacket and punched into his side. And that was my first round, hitting him in the side. But he's still coming to bear with the gun, and I remember pressing the trigger, and in my thinking, I'm thinking, why won't this gun go faster?
Yeah.
I fired 6 rounds as fast as I humanly could. I hit him on the first round. The second round nicked him on the leg. And the other 4, I hate to admit, I buried into the pavement.
Yeah.
And
I will say you're a very good shooter.
Yeah, and everyone wants, but your shooting mechanics do kind of go out the window a little bit in high stress. Thank God I got him with that one good solid round in the side, and it traveled through meat and popped out nearly about a quarter inch away from his spine.
Yeah.
And my thought process was keep shooting until he drops the gun or he goes down. And, I loosed those rounds, and then he dropped the gun and fell straight forward. I remember moving up on him with my gun still bearing on him, ready. I fully convinced I was going to fire that trigger if I had to again.
Mm-hmm.
And, like we talked on the first podcast, I had beat myself up for 14 years about hesitating.
Yeah.
And I knew I wasn't going to hesitate. I didn't hesitate on this one. I'd mentally trained myself not to hesitate for 14 years. I punished myself. And so I was ready to fire again if the gun was right by his hand. And I thought, if he reaches for it, I'm dumping this magazine. I'm going to dump the magazine into him. The other 3 officers came around. They were ARs. One of them swung his AR back. I'm still covering him. He grabs him by the arms, pulls him in, and handcuffs him. I thought, okay, that's over. And I remember looking back to where I'd ran from, and the downed officer was still lying in the yard by himself. There was no one with him. And So I ran back to him, and I grabbed him by the shoulders, and I rolled him over. And by this time, two of the bravest officers that I'd say I've been around, Officer Clint Stewart, who's now with, I believe, the Jasper, Indiana Police Department, and my Assistant Chief, Brad Bailey, two of the bravest people I've ever had the pleasure of serving with. They came running up to me, and I remember the Sheriff's Department had some odd vest on that I didn't know how to work the straps on, and I asked Clint, and I said, help me get his vest off, And again, I still couldn't find a pulse. I remember checking for a pulse, and we threw his vest off of him. And, that round hit him right in the eye.
Yeah.
And
he was dead before he hit the ground, probably.
He was. And
before we go further, we need to say Jake Pickett, Deputy Jake Pickett,
Deputy
of the County
Jake
Sheriff's
Pickett.
Office.
And Jake, I didn't know Jake that well. Jake came on to the Sheriff's Department the year before I became chief, so I was working nights. So Jake would join our group at the local gas station getting our free soda pop. I'd butcher his name up every time I introduced him, Instead of Pickett, I'd call him Prickett or Lickett or something like that. And he was very, very good-natured. I mean, he was, our guys really liked him, and Jake was always there to help, and he was a fine officer. He really was. And I remember pulling his vest off, and then it occurred to me what was happening. Now, I grabbed Clint Stewart's hand, and with my right hand, and I put my left hand on Jake's chest. And I asked God to forgive that man for his sins and to allow him into the kingdom of heaven, because I knew what meeting was taking place at that very moment. And I knew medically there was nothing I could do for him. I knew what meeting was taking place. And I always tell people, I'm not a perfect Christian, but I am a Christian, and I truly believe that Jake was meeting our Lord at that time. And I prayed for him. And Clint and I both said amen. And then it seems like all hell broke loose.
Yeah.
Next thing I know, here comes an ambulance crew and firefighters.
And kudos to them. They didn't know if the scene was safe or not. They just came in.
Here's the thing, most police officers say, the fire department and the EMS crews will stage a safe distance away until we call the scene safe. This is kudos to the Witham Memorial Hospital EMS. When they said, we have a police action shooting, we've got 2 down, 1 being an officer, they sent 2 trucks. That's EMT and a paramedic. That's 4 EMTs and paramedics come to the scene. When they put out that was an officer down and that they still had a shooter in the area, it was not a safe area, 3 more paramedics volunteered and jumped on those crews.
Yeah.
So we had 7 responding. Same way with the Lebanon fire. They're supposed to stage at a safe distance away. When it became an officer down, I remember seeing that big engine roar right into the hot scene, and those firefighters jump right out with their equipment. And I remember them running in, and they were going to do everything they can to bring him back.
Yeah.
And they started the CPR and running the lines, and it occurred to me that there were 4 or 5 officers standing around these firefighters with their rifles pointing out.
Yeah.
Because we didn't know if there was another gunman in the area. Those officers had formed a protective circle around them. And I always remembered that. And, several months later, as a chief of police, I staged a large ceremony because I wanted to reward those men who were men and women, mind you. They were truly heroes in my book. And so I wanted to make sure that they were publicly recognized and awarded for their bravery. We had talked earlier during the first podcast about, after my first shooting, I desperately tried to call family.
Yeah.
And, I finally, you'd have to listen to that podcast. But it took me a while to get a hold of family. Well, this is 10 a.m. on a weekday when this occurred. And no sooner that I said the prayer for Jake, and just as the ambulance was pulling up and the EMS crew started gathering around Jake, I stood up and I grabbed my cell phone and I called my wife at work. And, which I'm sure as a spouse, you never want to hear this phone call, but all I could tell her was, Pam, there's been a shooting. Jake's dead. I shot the guy. Call my children and tell them that I'm safe. And she's freaking out on the other end. What? I'm safe. Just call my children. Tell them I'm okay. I'm safe. Tell my children. And I had to hang up. Because also, I'm the chief of police.
Yeah.
The second phone call I made, I hung up because I saw my officers. Now, mind you, the gunman had jumped out of a car and the car had taken off, and there was still
an active pursuit going on.
Active pursuit with possibly armed suspects. So I had a captain come in and says, "Can I rejoin the pursuit?" And I said, "Go, take charge of that." But I could see the look on the medic's face. I could see the look on the firefighter and the police officers there at the scene. I could see the look on their face. So the second phone call I made was to our chaplain, Terry Thorne. And she answered the phone, and I remember yelling at her on the phone, "I need your G-damn ass here now." Something you don't normally...
You're telling a minister that, yeah.
Something you normally don't talk to a minister. I said, "We've got a shooting. I got people in distress. Get your ass here now."
Yeah.
And she was, "Okay, I'm on the way." I said, "No, now, damn it. I'm coming. Yeah. And true to her word, within 15 minutes, there she is with her chaplain's badge around her neck and her bulletproof vest on, going to each officer and making sure they're okay. And once we got Jake on the ambulance, they had gotten a pulse back. So, he didn't get to say, but his family got to say goodbye to him. I think that was wonderful that they had the opportunity to do that. And so once the scene was secure and everything, and we'd set up a command post nearby to not only deal with the pursuit, but with the shooting. We got, we did an all-call for the department, got every single officer out because, again, we don't know what's going on. We're still trying to collect information.
And in the meantime, they did get the pursuit stopped, and some very brave officers who are our friends took those people down. They didn't offer any resistance, but the officers going up there didn't know what they were facing.
No, and it was not. It was a traffic stop out of the 80s. There was no felony traffic stop where we're going to hide behind our cars and we're going to order you out at gunpoint and make you dance and turn around, hold your arms up, and lay down.
Do the hokey pokey.
No, these officers were straight old school. They ran forward, engaged the subject through his car window, and assisted him out the car window onto the pavement.
Yes. In
a tactful, safe manner.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. So that was occurring, and then flash. We talked earlier about the first shooting, how things weren't done proper.
Yeah.
As far as the investigation. Well, this was in that 14 years between the shooting. I was lucky to attend the officer-involved shooting investigation course several times. I also attended about every PTSD course offered to police in this area. I think I attended them all. So in my mind, I said, no, this police action shooting will be investigated properly. One, because I'm the chief of police, and two, it's my ass on the line because I'm the shooter.
Yeah.
So, another officer drove me up to the station. I didn't have to drive myself. Well, again, I didn't have my car there this time. But I was driven up to the scene. I immediately surrendered my weapon and was automatically reissued another weapon. And, I kind of had to sequester myself a bit from the ongoings. Now, I had great staff. I had a great assistant chief and great captains who did a wonderful job with the command post. And So I had to kind of sequester myself. And a couple hours after, my daughter came to the police station, an emotional wreck.
Sure.
My daughter was crying. My daughter was in her 20s and just absolutely freaked out. And I remember her coming to my office and just bawling, and I'm holding my daughter, and I'm trying to console my daughter. And she's like, "Damn it, why did you leave the office? You're not supposed to leave the office." And I said, "Honey, Daddy can't do that."
Yeah.
And she goes, "You're not supposed to do this again." And she's crying. I said, hey, look at me. I'm alive. You're holding on to me. I'm alive. I'm not dead. I'm alive. So why are you upset? Dad's alive. And I remember saying, "You can't kill me. I'm Superman. You can't kill me." Got to have a little bravado in front of your children,
Sure, absolutely.
And I said, "Look, I'm fine. I'm alive. I'm the winner in this deal."
Well, let's go back to the shooter, who I won't even justify him by saying his name. You didn't kill him.
I did not.
A few more inches and you would have, but...
No, a few more inches, I probably wouldn't have killed him, but he would be defecating into a bag for the rest of his life and in a wheelchair if I hit his spine, but it came out just about half inch from his spine.
Yeah. Well, for my part of the story, I was out of town. I was actually going through downtown traffic in Nashville, Tennessee, when a friend of mine who is a newspaper reporter in a couple of counties over called and said, "What happened with LPD? One of your guys is dead."
Oh,
that's not news you want to get on your cell phone as you're going through traffic. So I am losing my mind trying to figure out what's happened. And eventually I got a hold of different people and found out what had gone on. We were driving to Florida, and as soon as we got to our condo, I debated, and I can't remember if I knew you were the shooter at this point or not. I don't know if I had those details, but I called. I think I did know, because that's why I called you, because I stood there on the balcony thinking he's probably a little busy, being both chief and being the shooter. But when you picked right up, and you were home at that point. It was probably late afternoon, and I will always remember. I said, "Dude, you okay?" And you go, "Well, I put down a cop killer, and I'm home with my wife. Yeah, life's good." And you meant it.
Yeah.
It wasn't false bravado, and I thought, you're going to be okay.
No, and I think that's what people that get involved in these shootings, be it a civilian or a police officer, if you have to use a firearm in defense of your own life or the life of someone else, in the end, you stop and say, "You know what? I'm enjoying the embrace of my wife or my spouse, and I'm holding my children,
Yep.
and I get to binge on Netflix tomorrow or something.
Yeah.
I am alive. So you know what? Everything else is gravy."
Exactly.
Don't get so caught up like, "Oh, what a horrible event." What do you mean? You're alive.
Yeah, you won the big victory.
Yeah, start celebrating that life more than anything.
Well, and you also said something that I chuckled about, and I actually wrote a story about this. You walked me through it, and very matter-of-factly, and you said, I missed several times. I don't think you knew number of shots at that point. But I said, well, how did that go down? Because it wasn't a great distance of a shooting.
Well, as I tell people, he was running at about 15 miles an hour, and he was 57 yards away, which is not true.
Not true, okay.
No.
But what you said was, well, I slapped that trigger like I slapped my wife's butt on Friday night.
Well,
and I just
you remember it
laughed.
because I remember telling you, because the firearms instructor said, "Well, you sunk 4 into the concrete because you were slapping the trigger." And you asked me, I remember this, "Were you slapping the trigger?" I said, "Brent, I was slapping that trigger like my wife's ass on a Saturday night."
And once again, I said, he's going to be fine.
The shooting mechanics, again, I'm glad I had that first round, that proper mechanics of the first round, but I'll be honest, when his gun barrel kept getting closer and closer to me, I kept thinking, no, faster.
Do you feel like you were back on the firing line, just doing
in a lot of ways,
what you're
yes.
supposed
Now,
to do?
I credit our Boone County SRT for my years on there with quite a bit. You're right, and I don't know. Nothing against the team today. The team before always thinks of the best.
Well, exactly.
Team.
We were the greatest ever.
We were, and so. But then I look at their training and I compare it to our training, because if you were the myriad of classes we had, everything from lock picking by the 7th Special Forces to explosive entry taught to us by SEAL Team 2.
Yeah.
And I remember taking a hostage rescue course a week long taught by a retired member of the 22nd SAS. aircraft interdiction taught by German GSG-9.
We had Delta trainers.
We had Louis Auerbach. Yeah, the Delta trainers. We were blessed getting such high caliber training. But yeah, no emotion. And to this day, you know, am I sad about Jake getting hit and leaving wife and children? Absolutely. But I don't get angry.
Really?
I'm not an angry person. I never have been.
That's true. I'll say that as your friend.
I've never been an angry person.
You let stuff go better than I do.
I can't hold a grudge for my life of me, you know. I don't even...
Stick with me. I'll teach you how. It's very therapeutic.
I'm never good at negative emotions. And, you know, it's like I mentioned to you once that I had this, I wanted to write to the shooter in prison and just say, you know, how are you? And you told me don't do it.
Don't do that.
Don't do it. You'll be disappointed. Don't do it.
Yeah.
And it's not even that I want to, you know, like, I hope you're suffering.
Yeah.
I hope, you know, you're having to hold somebody's pocket. You know, I hope that's happened to. I'm not that way. You know, there've been many times in the past 4 years that I've actually prayed for that young man. You know, because I want him to say, yes, God, I sinned. I was wrong for what I did. And I want him to realize he was wrong and pay for his crime. But I don't, to this day, I still don't have anger over the shooting. And I don't have the fear or anything like else. Then to go into the second shooting, I didn't have the same physical effects. I did not have the explosive diarrhea. And again, having attended all the PTSD courses, I knew what to look for, the sleeplessness. I knew exactly what the effects of adrenaline were going to be on my body.
So the takeaway from that point is it really is a good thing to get some training on, you got to train to shoot, but you also need some training about what happens to you afterwards.
You have to have the training. You know, yes, it's very important to get that training on PTSD, but on the actual moment, what happens to your body when you go through such high stress, what's going to occur. So it really takes away a lot of fear. You know, when I see my hand shaking, that's okay. It's not going to shake forever. It's just the adrenaline.
You don't have the palsy.
I don't have the palsy. You know, I knew everything was going to be fine. And you know, and the civil liability never even occurred to me. Didn't even care.
Yeah.
Cop killer. Put your ass down. Try to sue me.
Yeah.
You know, as police officers, that's the worst thing that our leaders have done, has tried to instill that civil liability fear in our head. You know, better to be judged by 12 jurors than carried by 6 pallbearers.
Yeah.
You know, if by God, don't pull that trigger unless you know 100% that you're justified in doing it.
Yep.
And then let God sort it out from there. You'll be fine. You did the right thing.
You know, and that kind of, it's a perfect segue into the question I was going to ask. I really want your opinion on something we've never really talked about. Do you feel like maybe, because this is old guys talking, in your first shooting, it was kind of the dark ages still, and it was suck it up, buttercup. You were back at work in 48 hours. And now we have critical incident debriefings. We get everybody together. We encourage them to cry and carry on. And I see there's good in that, but do you feel like maybe we've gone a little too far touchy-feely-wise, or do you think we're just doing it how we should now?
You know, I don't know. We're products of our environment. You and I were not raised in a time we were told, you know, rub some dirt in it, get up.
Yeah.
Okay. Today's officers, I'm not saying they're any less tough. I mean, I've got some really tough officers on our department that I'll go to battle with.
Yeah.
But they were also raised like, don't rub dirt in it. That'll cause an infection. You know, you're sad. Well, let's put you on this medication, or you need to talk to somebody about it.
Yeah.
You know, where we were taught big boys don't cry. So I think it's the way it is now is the way it has to be for that generation.
Good point.
Now, I don't think it's needed for our generation. I don't think it was needed for me. Now, you talk about the critical incident debrief. Flash forward 3 days. They have a big critical incident debrief. Myself, my assistant chief is there. All the officers who are involved are there. All the EMS that was there and the fire department. These are the ones that actually were at ground zero, hands-on. And it was taught by another county sheriff's department's chaplains that came over. And one of the chaplains says, you know, before we get started, he goes, I want to say something that I find Well, quite remarkable, he says. And this, you can tell this guy's liberal, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't mean to curse on your podcast. He's liberal. And he says, I find it quite remarkable that, for a department your size, the chief and the assistant chief actually left the office and came involved in the shootings. To which I retorted in front of everyone. I said, it's because other chiefs are pussies. And
okay, we're going to have to slap the explicit label on this one.
My assistant chief I'd always make Brad nervous, and he'd start rubbing his palms, and he'd elbow me like, "You're going too far, shut up."
I believe I've told you that before, too.
Yes, you have, and that's probably why I'm not the chief now.
But moving on.
I am a captain, but moving on. All the firefighters and the EMS who know me, who've worked with me for years, they all burst out laughing. They expected nothing less from me. And I remember that chaplain like, I have no retort for that.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
But again, old school, new school, I'm fine. Yes, we're going through the critical incident debrief. Yes, I'm going through the steps. Yes, I think it's very valuable for some people here. Me, I think I'm okay. And the past 4 years, yeah, again, like I told you in the first shooting, you relive it 1,000 times the first day and maybe only 999 times the second day.
Yeah.
And each day it gets less. Each day that you get farther away from it, it gets easier to handle because then again, you know what? I've got a beautiful wife. I have 2 beautiful grown children, and I have the most precious and beautiful granddaughter in the world. And I get to go over there and crawl around the floor and play blocks with her and everything else. Because you know why? Because I am alive. Yep. There's nothing to cry about.
Well, a corollary to the previous question is this inspired a lot of discussion about PTSD. And as you said, today's generation has different expectations and beliefs, but do you feel like we're doing a disservice to our officers saying, oh, you're going to have PTSD and you're going to have a breakdown? And
oh, absolutely. Let's not keep telling them. Let's not point them towards failure. Let's not point them and say, okay, you're definitely going to have PTSD out of this. Why don't we sometimes know you're alive? You're good.
Yeah.
Dude, listen to you. Listen to you breathe in and out. Is that your wife? You guys going out to dinner this week? Man, that's great.
Feels good, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're alive. Let's focus on that, the fact that you're alive. Yes, very traumatic event. Now, where we're doing the disservice to the police is, yes, it's a very traumatic event. Okay, you go back to work next week. Get ready. Might happen again.
Yeah.
And like I've told those police officers, at some very horrible scenes, is this a horrible scene? Yeah, Captain, it is. Okay, wait, it's going to get worse.
Yeah.
If you think you've seen the worst scene in your career, wait
till next week.
It's going to get worse. You'll never see the worst. It's going to happen again. Get ready for it. Okay, you've been in a shooting. All right, let's sit down. Let's talk about it. What'd you do wrong? What'd you do right? Okay, the reason we're doing this because you got to get ready because you might be in another one next week.
And you're living, breathing proof of that.
Hey, Buttercup, this is the career you chose. If you don't like this, go to work at Menards or somewhere.
Yeah.
This is the career you chose. So it's the same like a firefighter. Ooh, got burned a little bit in that fire. Well, there's going to be another house fire next week, and there's going to be people trapped in there that need your help. In the same way, the shooting is horrible. I'm sorry you had to go through this. Get ready for the next one now.
Yep.
All right? Have a good cry. And I've always told all the officers, there's only 2 people that should see you cry, and that's your spouse and your chaplain. And leave it at that, because there's one thing. This is a very politically incorrect statement for our world, but in the world of law enforcement, this is the truth. We don't want to admit that it's the truth, but it's the truth. You can be forgiven for being injured in law enforcement. You'll never be forgiven for being weak. That'll stay with you your entire career. You back down, you're scared or something, that's going to carry with you for the rest of your life. I don't think there's people out there who's like, that is a horrible statement. Well, it's the truth. You can be forgiven for being injured. You break a leg in a fight or something, that's a hell of a war story. You back down in a fight, you'll never be forgiven in this career.
That's really the only way it should be, because if I call the police and there's a bad guy here, I really don't want a big chicken to show up.
Again, we were, I say it's luck. Now, there are many liberals out there saying that it was horrible what we did to the police officer in the 90s by teaching them the warrior ethos.
Yeah.
No, it's not. It gets you up. It gets you up from the fight. It will, once you're knocked down, you keep getting back up. That's the warrior ethos. What do the people want? When your life's in danger and you call the police, do you want someone to come to your door and say, well, I don't want to talk to that suspect because it might trigger me? No, you want that person who is emotionally, physically, and mentally and spiritually strong enough to do that job because you know what? It's your wife and children that need the help. And it's, I hate, and I can see why so many officers now are retiring. I absolutely hate the way the media, I don't even blame the public, it's the media and a very minute portion of the public that wants to try to soften us and blame us for all the world's ill will and all that stuff. And I wanted to say to those people, did your daughter sleep peacefully in her bed last night? Was she raped? No. You're welcome. Don't question what I had to do to protect your family.
Let's wrap this thing up in hopefully a nice, neat package. You've been involved in 2 police shootings. How has these 2 experiences of shooting people under very trying circumstances, how has it changed you?
Maybe this is not the correct thing to say. It is the honest thing. I don't think it's affected me negatively in any shape, form, or manner. Has it affected me positively? It's affected me positively in my career, simply the fact that many officers out there are always going to ask themselves, when that moment of truth comes, will I be able to pull the trigger? I know I can. I have 23 months to go, and when my 3rd police action shooting happens, I know that if I'm 100% justified in doing it, I'm going to do it. No matter what, I'm going to retire. So that's a positive in itself. The other positive I see, you know what? After going through 2 experiences where you thought, I could, maybe I'll die. I didn't think I could die until later on.
Yeah.
When you chalk talk it and you discuss it afterwards. But you know what? Yeah, I love my wife more. I love my children more. I know life is very fragile. I know to enjoy my life to the utmost. I think that's the biggest positive over it. I have so much an appreciation for life. And I also believe that the biggest positive is that I always focus on the positive and never on the negatives, because I always truly believe no matter what, it gets better.
Yeah.
It's always going to get better. What you're suffering for this day might not matter in 10 days. You might not think about it in 10 months, and in 10 years, it won't even be on your radar. It won't even occur to you what's going on. And, my career's never been a merry-go-round. My career has always been a roller coaster, and I've enjoyed the ride.
Well, with that, great words to end this podcast. As I've said, I think this is some pretty compelling stuff, and it was hard to talk to you about it, but I felt like your story was something that a lot of folks will relate to and be interested in. So, Tyson Warmoth, thank you so much. Let's hope that you finish your 23 months.
I'm going to.
Without any more excitement of this kind.
I pray every day that I don't have that excitement.
Yeah.
But if it happens, it happens.
You're ready. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Brent.
This episode is dedicated to the memory of Deputy Jake Pickett of the Boone County, Indiana Sheriff's Office. End of watch, Monday, March 5, 2018. Thank you for listening to the Guns Magazine podcast. Guns Magazine was first on the newsstand, and today we're bringing you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you've got any questions or comments about the show, please email me. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast directory, YouTube, and of course, at gunsmagazine.com. And while you're online, don't forget to check out our great sister publications, American Handgunner Magazine at AmericanHandgunner.com, AmericanCop.com, and our numerous special editions available on the websites. Most of all, while you're online, I'd really appreciate it if you would share a favorite episode or some kind words on your own social media. Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire staff at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now get out there and get shooting.